Greetings, true believers. Well, Marvel May 2022 now comes to an end as we wait to look at the final film in Phase 3 of the MCU, Spider-Man Far From Home. In Extingo, Mexico, Nick Fury and Maria Hill investigate an unnatural storm and encounter the Earth Elemental. Quentin Beck, a superpowered individual, arrives to defeat the creature. Beck subsequently defeats the Elemental and is recruited by Fury and Hill. In New York City, the Midtown School of Science and Technology completes its year, which was restarted to accommodate the students who previously disintegrated 5 years earlier as a result of Thanos' actions. They had reappeared unaged thanks to the actions of the Avengers. The school organizes a 2-week summer field trip to Europe, where Peter Parker, who is still mourning the death of his mentor Tony Stark, plans to reveal to classmate MJ his attraction to her. Happy Hogan informs Parker that Fury intends to contact him, but Parker ignores Fury's phone call. Parker and his classmates travel to Venice, Italy, where the water elemental attacks. Peter helps protect his classmates, while Beck arrives and defeats the creature. Fury meets with Parker and gives him Stark's glasses, which were meant for his successor. The glasses enable him to communicate with and take command of the artificial intelligence Edith, which has access to Stark Industries' databases and commands a large orbital weapon supply. Beck claims to have entered from an alternate reality within the multiverse, where the 4 elementals killed his family and destroyed his civilization. With only the fire elemental left to destroy, Beck predicts he will attack Prague. Parker declines Fury's invitation to join the fight and returns to his class trip. Fury secretly changes the class itinerary to divert the students to Prague. There, Parker is forced to help Beck fight the fire elemental to again protect his friends. Beck manages to destroy the creature with Parker's help. Fury and Hill invite Parker and Beck to Berlin to discuss the formation of a new superhero team, but Parker decides that Beck should go alone and transfers control of Edith to him. Once Parker leaves, Beck celebrates alongside ex-Stark Industries employees, with whom he had been working to masquerade as a superhero. Beck, who was fired from his position as Stark's holographic illusions specialist for his unstable nature, used advanced projectors to simulate his powers in the elementals, and now hopes to use Edith's orbital weaponized drones to increase the scale of his illusions and fraudulently establish himself as an Avenger-level hero. After MJ tells Parker she knows he is Spider-Man, they discover that a piece of debris she retrieved during the battle with the fire elemental is a projector which shows the air elemental, leading them to realize Beck's deception. Parker travels to Berlin to warn Fury, only to be trapped by Beck with an illusory Fury, into revealing the names of his friends who knew about Beck's plan and is hit by a train. Left for dead by Beck, Parker contacts Hogan, who flies him to London, where his classmates are. Beck uses Edith to orchestrate a fusion of all the elementals as a cover to kill Parker's friends. Parker is able to disrupt the illusions, so Beck attacks him with drones. Parker regains control of Edith and defeats Beck, who was hit by a misfired gunshot from one of the drones. Before he dies, Beck tells one of his associates to retrieve data from the drones. After returning to New York City, Parker begins a relationship with MJ. In a mid-credit scene, J. Jonah Jameson of the DailyBugle.net broadcasts doctored footage of the London incident in which Beck frames Spider-Man for the drone attack and his death before exposing Spider-Man's identity to the world, much to Parker's shock. In a post-credit scene, Fury and Hill are revealed to be the Skrulls Talos and Soren in disguise, under orders from the real Fury while he is away commanding a Skrull spaceship. Dun dun dun! So now let's take a look at the production of this movie, beginning with the development. In June 2016, Sony Pictures Chairman Tim Rothman stated that Sony Marvel Studios were committed to making future Spider-Man films after Spider-Man Homecoming. The following month, Marvel Studios President Kevin Feige said if additional films were made, the company had an early idea to follow the model of the Harry Potter film series and have the plot of each film cover a new school year, with the second film intended to take place during Parker's junior year of high school. By October, discussions had begun for a second film, including which film would be featured, according to Spider-Man actor Tom Holland, who signed on for 2 more Spider-Man films after Homecoming. In December, after the successful release of the first Homecoming trailer, Sony slated a sequel to the film for July 5th, 2019. Sony's insistence that the sequel be released in 2019 complicated Marvel's preference for secrecy regarding their plans for Spider-Man in this film and their other MCU films, since the character would die at the end of Avengers Infinity War and would not be resurrected before Avengers Endgame in April 2019, by which time marketing for this film would have already begun. After being able to include Iron Man for Homecoming, Sony was revealed in June 2017 to have the use of another Marvel Studios controlled character for the sequel. Feige said that Marvel and Sony were just solidifying our plans for the film, and felt Spider-Man's appearances in Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame will launch him off into a very new cinematic universe at that point. Similarly, Captain America Civil War informed everything in Homecoming. Marvel and Sony both wanted Homecoming director Jon Watts returning for the sequel, with Feige saying that's the intention for sure, and Watts said he was signed for another Spider-Man film. Feige said the sequel would have a subtitle like Homecoming and would not feature 2 in the title. He added the filming was expected to begin in April or May 2018. As with Homecoming, Feige said the film's villain would be one that had not yet been seen in film. By July, Watts was in negotiations with the studios regarding his return for the sequel, and Marissa Tomei expressed interest in returning as Aunt May from the previous films. The film set 8 months after the conclusion of Avengers Endgame. Watts felt dealing with many of the unanswered questions from Endgame posed a fun creative challenge for the Far From Home team. They look to make a movie that's in that world and deals with those stories, but is also still a fun Spider-Man movie. For example, Ned, MJ, and Flash all turned to dust during the events of Infinity War along with Parker, while some of his classmates did not and are now 5 years older due to the events of Endgame. Watts compared this dynamic to the film Flight of the Navigator, calling the situation really weird, but also something you can have a lot of fun with. And now on to the pre-production. At the end of August 2017, as the film was entering pre-production, Chris McKenna and Eric Summers were in final negotiations to return from Homecoming to write the sequel. In early October, Jacob Batalon confirmed he would reprise his role of Ned in the sequel. Feige confirmed that Watts was returning to direct the sequel in December. In February 2018, Zendaya was slated to return for the film, reprising her role as MJ. Location scouting for the film began at the end of the month, as did the pre-visualization process for the creative team to begin planning action sequences and visual effects for the film. By late April, Feige stated that filming was scheduled to begin in early July 2018 and would primarily occur in London. This was a change from the first film, which was mostly produced in Atlanta. Feige explained that one of the reasons behind this change was because the majority of the sequel would be spent around the world outside New York City. A month later, Jake Gyllenhaal entered negotiations to play Mysterio, while Tomei and Michael Keaton were confirmed to reprise their respective roles of May and Adrian Toomes/Vulture. Gyllenhaal's casting was confirmed a month later, but Watts later said that Keaton and Laura Harrier will not be appearing in the sequel. Also May, McKenna and Summers were also confirmed as the film's screenwriters. They began working on the film from a set of notes that Marvel had put together based on different influences and story ideas. This included the directive that the film would be releasing shortly after Endgame and would need to deal with the death of Stark due to the relationship between that character and Spider-Man that previous films had established. The film also needed to deal with the after effects of the blip, the 5-year period between Infinity War and Endgame where half of all life disappeared. Mysterio was chosen to be the film's villain because he is one of Spider-Man's iconic villains that had yet to be featured in a film, and because of his history of deception in the comics lent itself to a character who could take advantage of a Spider-Man that is mourning the death of Stark. This also led the writers to explore relevant modern themes such as fake news. Mysterio's plan went through several iterations, including an early suggestion that he could be an alien Skrull in disguise. The film reuses 2 of Spider-Man's costumes from the previous films, his main costume from Captain America Civil War and Spider-Man Homecoming, and the Iron Spider suit from Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. It also introduces 2 new costumes, a black stealth costume given to Parker by Nick Fury, and a new upgraded Spider-Man suit that Parker designs for himself at the end of the film. Marvel Studios head of visual development, Ryan Meinerding, sorry if I mispronounced that, explained that Watts had wanted to include a suit inspired by the Spider-Man noir version of the character, which led to the design of the more tactical stealth suit. He added that the suit represents Parker experimenting with being a new kind of superhero. Other technical costumes from the comic books were looked at when developing this one. Meinerding felt this looked less practical than the straightforward noir inspiration. The costume includes tactical goggles that can be flipped up. For Parker's new self-designed costume, Meinerding originally designed it with the idea that it could be made from Parker's webbing since that is the strongest material he has access to. Practical versions of the costume were created by Ironhead Studio, who previously worked on the Amazing Spider-Man films. For Far From Home, Ironhead developed a skull cap for the costumes that has built-in fans to prevent the goggles from steaming up. They also developed a magnetic bellows system for connecting the goggles to the mask, so they could be easily removed but not fall off during action sequences. At the end of June 2018, Home revealed the film's title to be Spider-Man Far From Home. Feige explained that they decided to have Holland reveal the title because they thought it was likely that it would leak after filming began anyway. He compared the title to Spider-Man Homecoming and that it is full of alternate meaning while continuing the use of home, and revealed the film's premise to be Parker and his friends going to Europe on summer vacation, away from their home of New York. And now on to the filming. Principal photography began on location in Hertfordshire, England on July 2, 2018, under the working title Fall of George. Matthew Joy Light served as director of photography, after previously working with Watts on Cop Car. Watts wanted to work with Lloyd on Homecoming, but the cinematographer was working on Power Rangers at the time. Filming moved to London, with locations including East London at a London Stansted Airport. Studio work occurred at Warner Brothers Studios, Leavesden, near Watford, England, where a Venice set was created on one of the studio's backlots. Shortly after filming began, set photos revealed Hemke Madeira would return as bodega owner Mr. Delmar, while J.B. Smoove and Newman Ackard joined the cast. By early August, Samuel L. Jackson and Kobe Smulders were confirmed to be appearing in the film, reprising their respective roles of Nick Fury and Maria Hill from previous MCU films, and Remy Heed joined the cast later in the month. Filming took place in Prague and Liberec in the Czech Republic in September, and moved to Venice by the end of the month. Filming moved to New York City and Newark, New Jersey in October, where he used the working title Bosco. Locations included areas around Madison Square Garden and Penn Station and Newark Liberty International Airport. Filming wrapped on October 16, 2018. Lloyd explained that the creative team had approached the film as a road trip story, as they wanted to maintain the distinct look and feel of each location visited. This meant giving each stop on the school trip a distinct lighting scheme and color palette. For example, Lloyd visited Venice 3 times through location scouting to discuss how the scenes there would be filmed, and learned that the city has a bright pastel feel where light comes through and hits a building, and bathes people in this warm sandy light. Prague, on the other hand, has a more warm and cool mix, and the beauty of that sort of Baroque Eastern European architecture. The production took advantage of lighting already on the buildings in Prague, which were often lit for texture in real life. Lloyd felt comfortable working with the aesthetic of the MCU after acting as director of photography on the first season of the MCU television series Daredevil and the miniseries The Defenders, as well as working on additional photography for the films Thor Ragnarok and Captain Marvel. Lloyd originally began planning to use the Alexa 65 cameras the Marvel usually films with, but Sony asked that they focus on optimizing the footage for their 2K releases, so the production switched to Alexa mini cameras. This ended up being a lot easier for the camera department to use on location and for combining live-action shooting with visual effects elements. Get back here. And now on to the post-production. In late October 2018, Sony Pictures reached a new multi-film agreement with IMAX Corporation to release their films at IMAX, including Far From Home. At Sony's CCXP Brazil panel in December 2018, it was revealed that the Elementals, the group of characters based on the elements of water, earth, air, and fire, would appear in the film. Each elemental takes inspiration from another Spider-Man villain, such as the water elemental including elements of Hydro Man, and the fire element borrowing from Molten Man. The names of these other villains are not given to the characters in the film. Barton Starr was confirmed to be reprising as well as Mr. Harrington from Homecoming the next month. In April 2019, Sony moved the film's release date up to July 2, 2019. While promoting Endgame at a fan event in Shanghai, Feige said Far From Home would be the final film of the MCU's Phase 3, rather than the start of Phase 4 as some had believed. Also in April, Jackson returned to do reshoots for the film. Discussing the film's mid-credits scene, Watts explained that they approached J.K. Simmons as late as possible before the film's released to ask him to reprise his role as J. Jonah Jameson for Sam Raimi's Spider-Man film trilogy, hoping to keep the cameo as a surprise for fans. Watts acknowledged that there was a chance Simmons would not want to reprise his role, but stated that he never considered another actor, saying, It's gotta be him. Like, if it wasn't him, it wasn't worth doing. After being pitched the idea for the cameo, Simmons called Raimi and received the director's blessing to return to the role for the new film. The MCU version of the character is brand new, not the Raimi version from another dimension or multiverse. Simmons' footage was filmed in a Disney conference room in front of a green screen. Once noted that Simmons' performance was over the top in Raimi's films, but now the same performance has real-world comparisons, such as Alex Jones. According to Feige, the changes in the real world also meant that moving the character from newspaper editor to a radical red news journalist that kind of screams in front of the camera made more sense. Simmons said he and Watts did not see eye to eye on the film's contemporary portrayal of the character versus his performance in Raimi's films. Watts described Far From Home as a con man movie with so many layers of deception, and for the post-credits scene, he felt that ending of the film with one last twist was on theme. He felt that he owed the fans a more substantial post-credits scene than the joke he won at the end of Homecoming. The Far From Home scene depicts fear and vacation, and a simulation, both of which are also themes in the film, and reveals that the fear and hill seen throughout the film are actually Skrulls in disguise. Watts felt this twist made sense after Fear's interactions with the Skrulls and Captain Marvel. Post-production for Spider-Man Far From Home was completed in June 2019. And now let's take a look at the visual effects. The film's visual effects were provided by Framestore, Industrial Light and Magic, Image Engine, Sony Pictures Imageworks, Luma Pictures, Rising Sun Pictures, Scaling VFX, Territory Studio, and Method Studios. Jen Exter served as visual effects supervisor on the film, explained that following the release of the animated film Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, the effects team looked for ways to use similarly inventive visuals in Far From Home. They ultimately did not use added effects to represent Spider-Man's spider sense because these did not fit within the live-action world or were too similar to previous effects, such as Daredevil's sonar vision. They did try to use Spider-Man's actions and the use of his abilities to show his growth since Homecoming, but also show his reach as always exceeding his grasp as he refines his superhero skills. The film's main untitled sequence was designed by Perception. Method Studios added Spider-Man to a Venice speedboat scene using their Spider-Man suit asset from Homecoming. Image Engine created the Stark jet, drone, and satellite. The jet work included the creation of a new Spider-Man suit, for which the vendor had to design the interior of the suit based on a scan of a practical costume they were given. They also made an Netherlands tube field for a scene that was filmed in a grass field in the UK. It required around 2 million digital tulips. Rising Sun Pictures created holograms used by Mysterio when he first explains the elementals to Spider-Man, which included simulations of black holes and elements researched from real-world history and mythology. The company aimed for holograms to have a similar quality to the ones they had created for Captain Marvel. Mysterio was designed by Ryan Neanderthal, Marvel Studios' head of visual development, to look like a combination of different Marvel heroes such as Thor and Doctor Strange. His fishbowl helmet is retained from the comics. Sears described the character as the larger-than-life showman at heart, and almost a superhero version of Liberace. The digital model for Mysterio was created by Scanline. The Elementals consisted of animated figures, often driven by slowed-down motion capture performances, with environmental effects layered on top. Scaling created earth and water, Luma created fire, and Imageworks created the final amalgamation of the four creatures, referred to as the Super Uber Elemental, or SU. For the fire elemental, Luma created different looks and actions for the character to show Watts and Sears' potential designs and movements for the character. This included a progression where the creature goes from being upright and humanoid to bigger and more hunched over as it consumes the metal throughout the sequence. Watts responded positively to movements that looked more creature-like. The final battle was created by Imageworks and consists of over 300 visual effects shots. In addition to creating the Sioux, which required extensive effect simulations for the different combined elements such as water tentacles, rocks, lava, and lightning, the company had to create a digital model of the Tower Bridge for the fight to take place around. The company attempted to fully render only small actions of the bridge where needed, but ultimately required around 80% of the bridge to be fully detailed due to how much of it is seen throughout the fight. They made use of Image Engine's Stark Jet model and Scaline's Mysterio asset for the fight, and created the drone models and new Spider-Man suit that were used by the other vendors. They started with a single drone design that featured missiles, cannons, and Gatling guns, but this became repetitive during the battle, and so flamethrower and sonic blaster drones were added. Additionally, the sky environment needed to be digitally replaced in most of the sequence. Here we go. Framestore handled the illusion battle in which Mysterio traps Spider-Man within a series of elaborate fear-based illusions. Based on early prototypes of the sequence from Framestore, Marvel decided to extend it to around 150 shots. It was heavily pre-visualized to define which background plates and motion capture performances would be required. Framestore visual effects supervisor Alexis Washbrod, sorry I mispronounced that, compared the motion capture process for the sequence to automated dialogue replacement, where each short section of the performance was captured individually. The company used existing digital assets from other vendors, including for the different Spider-Man suits, combined with new models such as those for statues of fallen heroes or a zombie Iron Man. The effect of green smoke that is used throughout the sequence was created using Houdini. Framestore took inspiration from the title sequences of the James Bond film series, especially that Spectre for the graveyard portion of the battle. For the transition between the werewolves and the illusions, Framestore had to match a similar transition from the Barf sequence of Captain America Civil War, which was just described as a time-consuming process for each environment in which it was required. Sears compared the sequence to elaborate Broadway production with an unlimited budget, and named several other visual influences, including the Looney Tunes short Duck Amuck, Paprika, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and the Pink Elephants on Parade scene from Dumbo. And now finally on to the music. Spider-Man Homecoming composer Michael Giacchino was confirmed to return to score Far From Home in October 2018. Whitney Houston's I Will Always Love You plays during the Marvel Studios opening logo as part of the film's opening in memoriam scene. The end credit song is Vacation by the Go-Go's. The soundtrack album was released by Sony Classical on June 28, 2019. So overall, I really do like this movie, and while it's not my favorite of the Tom Holland Spider-Man movies, this one is still pretty damn good, and I definitely recommend checking it out. So, yeah. So overall, I give Spider-Man Far From Home 5 arc reactors out of 5. Well, hope you enjoyed this look at Phase 3 of the MCU, and don't forget to tune in next month as Buffy vs. June continues, as we take a look at Buffy the Vampire Slayer Season 2. And next year, Marvel May will be taking a look at Phase 4 of the MCU, beginning with Black Widow. So, yeah. And as I know, probably by next year, not all of the Phase 4 films will have been out, so I'm just going to be taking a look at the ones that have been released before May of next year, so, yeah. Anyway, so, until next time, in the words of the late great Stan Lee, Excelsior!